Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready to dive into another episode, another deep dive with us?
Always ready for a deep dive, especially into the world of wine.
Me too, especially today. We're talking Tannat.
Tannat, excellent choice.
It's one of those wines, you see it on the shelf and you may or may not know much about it. Maybe you know it as that big, bold red.
Right.
But there's a whole story, a whole journey behind it that I think is really fascinating. And that's what we're going to unpack today. Tannat's journey from its roots in France to its, shall we say, its reign in Uruguay.
Yeah, it's a real success story, actually. It's fascinating how a grape can sort of find its perfect place in a spot it never expected.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Tannat is originally from southwest France, right? And our sources indicate it's been a bit of a workhorse grape there, particularly in the Madeiran region. So for those of us who aren't familiar, what's the deal with Madeiran and why hasn't it, say, reached Bordeaux levels of fame?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Madeiran wines, they're known for their aging ability, that they're built to last.
Hmm.
And that's largely thanks to Tannat's naturally high tannins.
Right, those tannins.
Exactly. But that same intensity, it made them, how do I put this, maybe a little less approachable when they were young. They needed time to soften.
Ah, okay, so I see. So it's a waiting game with Madeiran. But then how in the world did this grape end up thriving in Uruguay?
Immigrants, Basque immigrants, to be specific. They brought Tannat over to Uruguay in the 19th century, hoping to recreate some of those familiar flavors from home. Little did they know, they were about to stumble upon this incredible terroir match made in, well, maybe not heaven, but definitely a really, really good vineyard.
Okay, now you say terroir, and I know that's like the magic word in the wine world, but I think for some of us who haven't exactly, geeked out on soil samples, can you break it down for us? What is it about terroir that's so important, especially in the context of Tannat?
Sure, so think of terroir like a really intricate recipe. Each ingredient, whether it's the soil composition, the amount of sunshine, even the direction of the wind, all of it contributes to the final flavor of the wine. And in Uruguay, Tannat kind of lucked out. It found this perfect combination of elements. Warm days, cool nights, those breezy coastal plains and those well-drained soils. All of it came together to give it that structure and that finesse it needed to really shine.
So Uruguay really provided the stage, and Tannat took the spotlight. And our sources seem particularly interested in the Canelones region. What is it about Canelones that makes their Tannat stand out?
Well, for one, Canelones has this beautiful combination of limestone soils and then that maritime influence from the nearby coast.
Okay.
The limestone that gives these wines this really wonderful minerality, almost a sort of saline tang that adds another layer to their complexity.
Interesting. And I can't help but notice this one name that keeps popping up in our research, Bodega Garzon. What can you tell us about them?
Oh, they're fantastic. They're producing some really exceptional examples of what Canelones Tannat can be, very focused on showcasing that unique terroir, minimal intervention in the winery, just letting those grapes speak for themselves.
Speaking of letting the grapes speak, we've got to talk about those tannins. We've all heard the stories, Tannat, the tannin powerhouse. Is it just me, or does the word tannin kind of make people nervous sometimes?
Yeah, it's true. Tannat's got this reputation for being, well, let's just say grippy, especially when it's young. But there's a lot more to tannins than meets the eye, or the palate, I guess you could say.
Right, there's nuance there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And understanding them is really key to understanding what makes Tannat so special.
Okay, so for those of us who need a little refresher, break it down. What exactly are tannins and why should we embrace them instead of, being afraid of them?
So tannins, they're these naturally occurring compounds, right?
Mm.
You find them in the skins, the seeds, the stems of grapes. And they're really what give a wine its backbone, its structure.
Yeah.
They create that dry, astringent sensation you get on your tongue. Kind of like if you drink black tea, that feeling.
Yeah, I get you.
So in excess, yeah, they can be harsh. But when they're in balance, tannins add so much complexity and aging potential. And that's where Tannat gets really, really interesting.
Okay, you've piqued my interest. Are you saying these powerful tannins are actually a good thing?
Oh, they're a very good thing. With Tannat, those tannins are part of its charm. They act like natural preservatives, letting the wine age gracefully for like decades. Over time, those tannins soften, they integrate, they become these silky, elegant textures you find in well-aged wines.
So you're talking about a wine that transforms, almost like a magic trick happening in the bottle.
Exactly. And as those tannins mellow out, they start to unveil these incredible layers of aroma and flavor. Initially, you get those bursts of dark fruit, blackberries, plums, maybe little cassis. And then as it breathes, as it evolves, you start picking up on those spice notes, clove, black pepper, especially as it ages.
Yeah, I'm sold on the aromas alone.
Uh-huh.
But tell me more about these hidden depths you mentioned. You said something about unexpected flavors that can emerge in older Tanit.
Oh, yeah, that's where things get really exciting. Give it enough time, and Tannat can develop these incredibly complex secondary and tertiary aromas. Hints of tobacco, cedar, eucalyptus, even leather, truffles in those really special bottles. It's real testament to the grape's aging potential, its ability to just evolve over time.
Wow, I had no idea Tanit had that kind of range. You've painted a very vivid picture. But all this talk of aromas and aging has me wondering, what's it actually like to take a sip of Tanit? What should we expect in terms of taste, mouthfeel, that kind of thing? So we've covered the history, the terroir, the tannins, the aromas. I think we're ready to actually get to the drinking part. What's it actually like to take a sip of Tanit?
Well, when you actually get that first sip of Tannat, it's undeniably full-bodied, right?
Mm.
You've got that satisfying weight, that kind of richness that coats your tongue.
Right, right.
But it's not heavy. And that's the thing. Tannat's naturally high in acidity, so it's got this wonderful freshness, like a vibrancy, that keeps it all balanced, especially when you pair it with a hearty meal.
Oh, speaking of hearty meals, we can't forget about food pairings. And it seems like, Tanit has the personality to stand up to some pretty bold flavors.
It really does. I mean, let's start with the classic, Tannat and red meat.
Right. Gotta have a good steak.
Exactly. It's a classic pairing for a reason. Those tannins in the wine, they actually bind with the proteins in the meat, and it creates this incredibly satisfying balance on your palate.
So those tannins we were talking about, it's not just about aging potential. They really are key to why this is such a food-friendly wine.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think let's not be limited by the classics here,
Mm.
right? Tannat's flavors can hold their own with some really interesting pairings. I mean, thing like grilled lamb with rosemary, or a rich mushroom ragu, or even just a perfectly charred burger.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling really adventurous, try it with something like mole. That slight bitterness from the sauce with those earthy notes in the tannat, it's incredible.
Wow. Okay, now you've got me thinking outside the box. But I
Right.
am hearing you say bold a lot, which is making me wonder about, cheese pairings. Because we all love cheese. Can Tanit handle a good cheese board?
Oh, absolutely. But not just any cheese, right? Think like bold blue cheeses like a Roquefort. It's a classic for a reason. That clash of those powerful flavors is just incredible. And for those who like a little more textural contrast, a hard, salty cheese like an aged Parmesan is just, a match made in heaven. The saltiness cuts through the tannins. The texture plays against that richness of the wine.
It's all about that balance.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm convinced Tanit is more versatile than I think I even gave it credit for. But before we wrap things up, I do want to zoom out a little bit. We've been talking a lot about Uruguay, but I know from our research that Tannat's actually popping up in other parts of the world too.
Yeah, you're right. We're seeing some really cool things happening with Tannat in Argentina, Brazil, even some here in the United States.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is each region's kind of putting its own unique stamp on the grape, right?
Yeah.
It's like a same grape with a whole new expression depending on where it's grown.
And that's the beauty of terroir in action.
Exactly. And on top of that, there's a real buzz right now around organic and biodynamic Tannat wines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think people are more aware now than ever of what goes into their bottle, and winemakers are really responding to that with these more sustainable practices that benefit not just the quality of the wine, but also the environment.
It's good for the planet, good for the wine.
Right. A win-win.
I can definitely raise a glass to that. Cheers. Well, that's it for today's deep dive into the world of Tannat. It's a grape with a rich history, an amazing ability to reflect the place where it's grown, and a flavor that's as bold as it is nuanced. We hope you enjoyed swirling, sniffing, and sipping along with us. Until next time, cheers!